Hi everyone, today I'm going to show you how to build a custom component that will basically look as if someone's typing a message to the user and it'll show on screen. I've used this a few times, typically in sort of welcoming people to the app. It's just a little bit more interactive and sort of sets it apart a bit from other apps. So I'm going to import useRef, useState and useEffect. useRef is necessary because we're going to be using some timeouts. I'll link why you might want to use useRef in the description, but basically it's about making sure that you've got the correct value of the state variable. I'm also importing style sheet and text. Style sheet so I could style my text, and text is going to just show my text on screen. It's actually pretty simple in terms of UI component. It's just more on the animation side of things that will be a bit more complex. So I'm just going to create a functional component here, and it'll get some props in. The props I'll get is an array of messages that I want to show, and also what will happen, like an onComplete prop, which is basically a function that I'll call when the animation is complete. That will allow me to take next steps, like I could gather user input and stuff like that. Currently I'm just styling that component. I'm just going to give it a color. You could actually pass in color as a prop or take the style of the text as a prop, but I'm just going to leave it pretty simple. I'm going to set up a few different state variables. So I've got text. I'm also going to have the cursor color. So I'm wanting to have a cursor on screen kind of blinking as if I were typing, much like you can see in like a normal text editor. I'm also going to, and it's going to default to transparent and then start blinking. I'm also going to have a message index, which is basically which item in the text array from the properties I'm at, and a text index, which is the current position inside that actual current message that I'm looking at. So it'll make a bit more sense in a minute when I get to that, but I'm also going to have some timeouts that I need to store in state. That's just so I can clear timeouts if the component's unmounted. So I'll do some cleanup for that, and also so I can stop the cursor blinking when we get to the end of the message. So yeah, like I said, I'm going to need to set up some references. So I'm just going ahead and doing that for everything. It's because when you call setTimeout, the function, when it calls the function, it will call it with the values at the time when you called it. And so it just ends up as pretty much the default values all the time, and never really proceeds. It gets kind of stuck. So yeah, if you notice that your animated text is getting stuck at a particular point, it's possible that you haven't got your references quite right. And so in that case, maybe take a look at that. My code will be on GitHub, so you can take a look there too. You can follow me if you want, because I'll put all my code for all my tutorials up. Or you can just check out the specific one that you want. So once I've got my references set up, I'll return my actual component. So I'm basically just wanting a text box with the style I just set up, and it's going to display that text state. And then it's going to show the cursor as well. So the cursor is just going to be that pipe character. And I'm going to give that a style as well. So the color is going to come from the cursor color state, and then the size will just be set hard-coded. It's always going to stay the same size. That's just going to be the pipe character. Cool, so now that I've got that, that should be pretty much my entire component, and I can go ahead and start writing some code to animate that component. So if I create this function, I'm going to create a function called typing animation. And basically this is one of the functions that's going to be set up to be called, but I'll show you that a bit later. And what it's going to do is first it's going to check the current text index, and if it's less than the props text message index, so basically the current message that we're trying to display on screen, because I'm going to send through an array, then it's going to increment and it's going to set the text to include that plus the next character. So it's always typing that next character at every timeout interval. Timeout intervals, you could actually pass that in as a property if you wanted. I'm just going to set it in the code. It'll get the properties text, and it'll get the current message that we're up to and get the char at the particular index that we're up to. That text index ref will reset back to 0 when we reach the end of our first piece of text. While we're going through the actual text at that index, then we will just keep incrementing. Then I'm going to need to create a new timeout, so I'm just going to update my timeouts. You can use the spread operator here, so that's the ... And then timeouts, basically what that does is it copies all those properties across from the timeouts reference, and then we can go ahead and update the ones we want. So I'm going to update the typing timeout because I'm going to create a new timeout so that we can move on to the next character in the current element that we're at. So once again, we'll call that typing animation, and we're going to have a 50 millisecond delay before the next one's called. You could once again get that as a property and make that available for the person to change. But for my purposes, this is good enough for the demo. Then I'm going to set that timeouts to be my updated timeouts. So if the next indexed is actually going to be outside the length of characters that we're on the current text of, we'll actually move on to the next message if there is a next message and we haven't hit the end of the array. So we'll set that message index to be the current one plus 1. And then we'll set the text index to be 0 because we're resetting here. And then we're going to go ahead and do a few things. We're going to have some new timeouts. So what we're going to want to do is, what I've done is I've made it so that each element in the array will have 2 new lines between them, and I'll sort of animate those new lines in as well, so it's not too jumpy. So that's why I'm going to have this first new line timeout, and I've just realised I made a typo on that, and that'll drive me nuts if I don't fix it, so I better fix that. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new line character, so I'm going to create a new function which will be the new line animation, and I'm going to call that with this timeout interval. That's just going to be called once off. It's not going to be called again until it hits this part of the code again. Whereas my typing animation is sort of recalling itself kind of recursively by setting timeouts that will call the same function. And then I'm going to want to also do a typing timeout because I want to go back to actually typing again once I've got my new lines there. And that's just going to call that typing animation that I've already called, but with a bit of a longer delay because I've got to wait for the 2 new lines to appear first. And then I'm just going to set those timeouts. These are just going to allow me to clean up later if we unmount the component for whatever reason. And if there's no more messages left, then we've finished all of our typing. So we're going to clear the cursor timer because we don't want the blinking to show anymore once the text has been fully typed out. And we're also just going to set that cursor color to transparent to make sure that it's not still visible. And if there is a props.onComplete function, then we'll go ahead and call that, and that would allow us to be able to prompt the user for input. For example, if we greeted them with a message and then wanted to get their name and greet them by that name. So now that typing animation function is complete, I'm going to show you that new line animation that I just mentioned. Basically, this one's a lot more simple. It's basically just going to set the text to be the current text plus a new line. So we're still using that text ref.current because we're inside that timeout. And we're just going to add a new line. And that should be pretty good. So now I'm going to add that cursor animation. So the cursor animation is pretty simple. Basically, if it's a color, then we're going to set it to be transparent, and if it's transparent, we're going to set it to be a color. That's going to make it blink on screen. You could pass this through the color. You could pass the color through as a property if you wanted to be able to provide a custom color. But I'm just going to set it manually because it's a very simple component today, and I'm not really trying to focus on that aspect of things. But yeah. Let me know in the comments below if you don't really know much about properties with components, and I can sort of do a bit of tutorial and explanation there. So yeah, like I said, just setting the cursor color here to be transparent because it'll be a color, and if it is already transparent, back to a color. So it will just blink on and off the screen. So now this is where the magic happens, use effect. So basically this is called once, and then it returns a cleanup function. And because it's called once, this is where we can set our initial timeouts and create that animation that we want to keep going. So I'm just going to once again save my updated timeouts. So I'm just going to set my typing timeout to be the timeout of my typing animation. So this is basically what I'm doing here is I'm calling setTimeout, which will call the typing animation after a set timeout in milliseconds. So 500 milliseconds I'll wait before starting typing. And I've got my cursor animation as well. This one I'm actually going to use set interval, and that's because instead of wanting it to just continue until I'm sort of at a point, I just kind of want it to continue steadily. I want it to continue blinking steadily rather than having to reset that timeout interval every time. So this is going to make it nice and easy. So set interval. And every 250 milliseconds, it's just going to call that cursor animation. So you'll see the cursor appear on screen prior to the prior to the typing, and that's because I've set that interval as a bit shorter. I'm just going to set those timeouts, and what you're going to do is you can return a cleanup function, and here I'm basically going to clear any intervals and timeouts that I have, and that's going to basically make sure that I don't have timeouts still going once my component unmounts. It's just sort of tidying things up. So I can do that same thing 4 times for each of my different timeouts. I've got my first new line timeout, my second new line timeout, and then for the last one I'll be clearing an interval because it is it's the cursor timeout. So I'll clear interval, and I'll change that typing timeout to be cursor timeout. So that's pretty much our component complete. So now we can go ahead and add that to our app.js file. So if I open the app.js file, there's a few things I'm going to want to import. Firstly, I'm going to want to import the animated typing component that we've just created so that we can include it in our application. We're not going to need text anymore. We're going to use the animated typing instead. I'm going to change the status bar to light, because what's going to happen is we're going to actually have a dark background because the colours I've specified for the animated typing look better on a darker background. So like I said, you could actually pass in colours as properties to your animated typing component and use those, and it would make it a bit more flexible to any use case, but for today I'm not going to bother. So that's what it looks like before I add my animated typing component, and now I'm going to go ahead and add it. It's got 2 properties, so text is one of the properties available, and basically it's going to take an array of messages. Those messages will be separated by 2 new lines, and you can also define an onComplete function. I'll define that in a minute, but just not right now. So first off, I just want to show you that it types out everything to the screen that you put inside these strings. So I'm going to say, hi, welcome to the animated typing tutorial. And then we are here to help. So if I go and save that, it'll start okay. So I've actually got a bit of a typo in my animated typing component by the look of it. I've specified chat at, but it should be char at. So if I go back to my animated typing component and find that typing animation function, yeah, there we go. We can see that I've specified chat at, but it should be char at. So if I save that, then it should reload and start typing. Hi, welcome to the animated typing tutorial. We're here to help. And then it just stops and the cursor disappears because I've cleared that cursor interval. So it's all behaving as expected, but now I'm going to want to import a button. I'm going to show a button once the animated typing has completed. I'm also going to have a state variable that defines whether the animated typing component has completed, and when that state variable is true, that's when I'm going to show the button. So I'm going to say let greeting completed, which is my state variable, and then I've got this function to set my state variable, which we set greeting completed, and I'll just call use state. I want this to be false initially, so I'm going to pass false to it. That's just because I don't want to show the button initially. I want to wait until it's completed. So if I go to the end of this animated typing component, I can add an onComplete function. And what I'm going to do is just set greeting completed to true because my message is being completely typed out at this stage. And then I can specify that I only want my button to show if the greeting is completed. So if the greeting's completed, then return a button with the title next. Otherwise, I'm just going to return undefined because I don't want to display anything if the greeting's not completed. Cool, so if I save that, we'll go ahead and see what happens. So once it finishes typing, it shows that next button. So that's all working as expected, and now I want to create a new state variable, which will basically be whether next has been pressed. What I'm wanting to do is I want to show you that if you wanted to sort of gradually collect information from the user, you could just sort of stage it by waiting to show the component until it's time to collect that data. So I'm going to show you that now. So basically I'm going to set that next pressed to true when the next button is pressed, and if that next pressed state variable is true, then I'm going to show a new animation component. Cool, so it's going to be animated typing, and I'm going to give it some text. I don't need an onComplete for this because it's not going to do anything after. I'm just going to give it some text. This is just going to be a one-liner. So hope you enjoyed the video today. And if it's not been pressed, then we're just going to return undefined. We don't want to show anything extra. So once the next button appears, we can press it and it will start typing the next message. So that's most of what I'm going to show you today, but I also want to show you what happens if you add two different animated typing components at the same time. So basically what that's going to do is they're both going to sort of start off their timeouts at the same time. So you're going to be seeing both showing at the same time. So they only happen like that because the state is set. So if I refresh my screen, then what you're going to see is it's all going to go again, and then both those two animated typing components should theoretically output text at the same time. So you can sort of see that they're both typing alongside each other. Hope you've enjoyed today's video. Like and subscribe. So yeah, please, if you have enjoyed today's video, like and subscribe. And once again, my code will be in the GitHub.